The wrestling industry is always changing and always on the move. In just an instant, a wrestler can go from being a star on the rise to a complete nobody. And while most of the time that's down to the booker, there are times where wrestlers are the ones who are entirely responsible for the deaths of their own careers. And today we're going to discuss a few of those wrestlers and a few of those cases, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about wrestlers who killed their own careers. Ken Anderson was signed to the WWE in February 2005 and would report down to OVW, and he had a tumultuous first couple of months in the company, as according to him, Jim Cornette, who was in charge of OVW at the time, didn't see much in him. But when Jim Cornette was fired and Paul Heyman came in to replace him, he showed much more interest in him and called him up to the main roster immediately. He mainly wrestled as a jobber on the B shows like Velocity and Heat when he was first called up, going through various name changes before finally landing on Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy would make his SmackDown debut in August of 2005 and would begin a win streak for himself on the brand. This win streak would last for 4 months before he was finally defeated by Eddie Guerrero in November. And Mr. Kennedy attacked him post-match, and it looked like a program was going to be starting between the two, but tragically Eddie Guerrero passed away just 2 days later, meaning Mr. Kennedy has the unfortunate honor of being Eddie Guerrero's final match. Mr. Kennedy would continue on but would face injury during a WWE Italy tour and would be out for 6 months, potentially stalling his career. However, WWE were clearly intent on pushing him because when he returned months later, Mr. Kennedy was straight back to winning ways, and in September 2006, he won the United States Championship, his first and only WWE title win. He would lose the title after only a month, but luckily for him, WWE had even bigger plans for him as he set his sights on the world title and even challenged for the big gold at the 2007 Rumble against Batista. He came out unsuccessful, but his future chances of winning the title increased when he won the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 23. The biggest win of his career so far, before he put the briefcase on the line in a random TV match against Edge, which Edge ended up winning because there was a fear Mr. Kennedy suffered a major injury and they changed the finish of the match. And while it was true that Kennedy did get injured, it wasn't as major as they thought, and maybe not enough for him to lose the Money in the Bank briefcase, so he kind of lost the briefcase for no reason at all. And when Kennedy returned from this injury, WWE had one final plan to finally propel him to the top and finally give him that push they've wanted to give him but keep getting delayed on. And that was by having him be revealed as Vince McMahon's illegitimate son. It was all made up, it made perfect storyline sense, and then he got suspended for steroids. We instead got Hornswoggle being revealed as Vince's son, and WWE completely gave up on pushing Mr. Kennedy after this. Kennedy was one of 11 total WWE wrestlers who were suspended for taking steroids at the same time as him, and it effectively killed his career as he coasted around on the WWE roster for 2 years after this, doing pretty much nothing but just floating around in the mid-card. But the final straw was when he nearly injured Randy Orton on an April 2009 Raw episode by botching a move during a match. Orton complained backstage to management and Mr. Kennedy was fired by the WWE 4 days later. Mr. Kennedy would end up going to TNA where he would get his world title run as Mr. Anderson, and it was a decent run he had in TNA, but you can't help but think where he could have reached in the WWE had he not got caught for steroids and all the bad luck he had faced before that. Sexy Star is a Mexican women's wrestler who has been an active wrestler since 2006. For just under the first decade of her career, Sexy Star would only ever wrestle in Mexico, mainly wrestling for AAA, which are the top promotion in Mexico. And during her time in AAA, she would become one of the most successful women stars in the history of the company. But in 2014, we would see the launch of Lucha Underground, which was a brand new wrestling promotion and a wrestling show that was portrayed as an episodic and lineal drama. Taking place in an underground Lucha Libre league, the show was filmed in Los Angeles and aired on the El Rey network across all the states. And with that came the hiring of many Mexican Mexican wrestlers, including Sexy Star, who would get her first exposure to an American audience. And Sexy Star was a quick hit in Lucha Underground. Lucha Underground allowed intergender wrestling, and this worked to Sexy Star's advantage as she quickly became one of Lucha Underground's most popular wrestlers. And she reached her peak in Lucha Underground Season 3 when she won Season 3's Aztec Warfare match, where she defeated 19 other wrestlers in a Rumble match to win the Lucha Underground Championship, the top title in the company. And while she would lose the title on the next episode, the fact she won it in the first place showed that she was a big enough star to be put in that position. But what happened next? Where was she a year from this point? Surely she should be propelled into the next level in her wrestling career. No, a year from winning the top prize on Lucha Underground, she was blacklisted from wrestling. How on earth did this happen? Well, it was of course from the Rosemary incident. Sexy Star would make a return to AAA while Lucha Underground was off filming and not airing, and she would win their women's title, and she would defend the title at their Triple Mania event, which is their biggest event of the year, defending it in a 4-way match against Hamada, Lady Shani, and of course Rosemary. In this match, she would retain after making Rosemary tap out to an armbar, which she then wouldn't let go of. The bell would continue to ring, referee would try to separate her, and she just refused to let go, and eventually she did let go, but we know what we just saw. We just witnessed Sexy Star lock in a real life armbar on Rosemary and refused to let go. And the wrestling world was set ablaze by this moment, and Sexy Star was effectively blacklisted from wrestling, with wrestlers taking to Twitter to criticize Sexy Star, with the most notable criticism coming from Cody Rhodes, who was seemingly working every wrestling company at that time, and he stated that he would never share a locker room with Sexy Star, which effectively blacklisted her from the entire US Indies. And she's never wrestled for a major company since this incident. She never reappeared for Lucha Underground, and the Sexy Star name and character is now being used by a completely different person and a different wrestler. You probably might be wondering who on earth Robbie McAllister is, and I wouldn't blame you. His most famous WWE moment was how he got fired, and it technically didn't even happen in the WWE. We'll get there, okay? So Robbie McAllister was one half of the Highlanders, a Scottish tag team made up of himself and his brother Rory McAllister. They made their wrestling debut in 2001 and would wrestle on the indies for a few years before in 2005 they were signed to the WWE. They signed in July and reported to OVW, which was developmental at the time, and they spent only a few months in developmental before their main roster debut started getting teased in mid-2006, and sure enough, in July 2006 they would make their debut on Monday Night Raw. And they'd go on a bit of a win streak, as for the next 3 weeks they would squash other tag teams weekly until they got a title shot at the Spirit Squad, and when they lost that match they were jobbers for the rest of their WWE careers, and it became very rare to see them win unless it was on heat. They literally had 3 weeks of wins and WWE were like, yeah, nah, we're done with you. On another note though, this era's tag division sounds absolutely cooked. The Highlanders versus the Spirit Squad for the titles, bloody hell man. And the Highlanders did nothing for the next 2 years in WWE except for jobbing, with their appearances mainly coming from heat and their Raw appearances being very occasional. But WWE still kept them around regardless, and they still had a job with the company. Even if they were jobbing, they were clearly seen as useful in their jobber roles. But in March of 2008, an incident would take place with Robbie that would destroy both of their WWE careers. On the 27th of March 2008, TNA were broadcasting an Impact episode, and Robbie McAllister was in attendance at the show. Of course, he's in the WWE, and we know this, we know he was at the show because he was shown on camera live on TNA and on TV. And reportedly, following his sighting at the TNA show, Robbie would receive an angry phone call from WWE officials ordering him to leave the show immediately, and as a result, he was made to miss WrestleMania that was in just a few weeks, be squashed by JBL in a minute in a match that probably got booked in Wrestlers Court, and 3 months later him and his brother Rory were both fired, and him showing up at TNA has largely been blamed for why they were fired. If we're being real, knowing Vince McMahon, he probably didn't even know these two existed before Robbie showed up on TNA. And regardless if they were jobbers or not, the Highlanders still were working in the WWE, and after Robbie turned up in TNA and ultimately got the two of them fired, Robbie would continue to wrestle and even have a match as recently as last month at 49 years old, but he was never able to reach anywhere near WWE ever again, and TNA didn't even give him the hire for getting him fired. Like, come on lads, that's the least you could have done. Anyway guys, that's it from me. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and a comment on what video you want to see next. Subscribe for more pro wrestling content. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye and keep on rolling.